My name is Nora Huber. I'm 32 years old, and I am a captain in the United States Army. I've spent my entire life following orders, fighting, and believing that the sacrifices made on distant battlefields would be rewarded with peace at home. But I was wrong. When I returned from Afghanistan 2 days early, the house was unnaturally cold. My son Leo ran out, his face pale. He didn't throw his arms around me. He trembled as he pulled on my uniform and whispered the words that tore my world apart. "Mommy, hide in the closet. Dad has a guest." From the suffocating darkness, I heard the giggle of my younger sister, Clara, and the voice of my husband, Ben, responding. They were together, in my house, in my bed. When I called my father, seeking a shred of comfort, his voice was ice through the phone. "Nora, I don't care how you feel. Handle this quietly. Don't let a family scandal affect my re-election." They thought they had me cornered, that they had stripped me of everything. But they forgot the one thing the military taught me. A cornered soldier isn't a victim. She's a weapon. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the time you spend reloading. The drive from Denver International Airport to our home in Colorado Springs was usually the best part. After months of the monotonous beige of desert landscapes, the rugged silhouette of the Rocky Mountains against the deep blue sky felt like a promise of home. This time, the feeling was electric. Tucked securely in my duffel bag was a detailed model of an F-22 Raptor, the one Leo had been circling in catalogs for months. I could already see his 7-year-old face lighting up, his small hands carefully tracing the wings. I could practically feel Ben's arms wrapping around me, his familiar scent of old books and coffee, the deep sigh of relief as he'd hold me tight and say, "You're home. You're finally home." I pulled into the driveway, my heart thumping with anticipation. But when I pushed open the front door, the first thing that hit me wasn't the welcoming aroma of the beef stew Ben always made when I came home. It was silence, a heavy, hollow silence that seemed to absorb all sound. And then I saw them. Sprawled carelessly by the entryway, as if kicked off in a hurry, was a pair of high heels. They weren't just any heels. They were a pair of sleek red stilettos. I knew them instantly. I had bought them for my sister, Clara, last Christmas. An icy chill snaked its way up my spine, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the Colorado air. My training screamed at me, situational awareness, assess the threat. But my heart desperately tried to rationalize. She's just visiting. Maybe she stayed the night. Don't be paranoid, Nora. I forced my feet to move, my boots feeling unnaturally heavy on the hardwood floor. Then, Leo appeared at the top of the stairs, and the last of my fragile hope shattered. His eyes were wide, two pools of panic in his pale face. He didn't run to me. He didn't shout, "Mommy!" He crept down the stairs, his movements furtive, and grabbed the sleeve of my fatigues. His small hand was trembling. He looked past me, toward the closed bedroom door at the end of the hall, and then back up at me. His whisper was a death sentence. "Mommy, hide in the closet. Dad has a guest." My soldier's brain took over. I didn't question him. I didn't make a sound. I let him pull me into the deep walk-in closet in the hallway, the one filled with our winter coats and Ben's old college sweaters. The heavy scent of cedar, once comforting, was now suffocating. As the door clicked shut, plunging me into near-total darkness, I heard them. The bedroom door opened. I heard my sister's laugh, a sound I had once loved, now like shards of glass scraping against my heart. "I should probably get going," she said, her voice light and carefree. "What's the rush?" That was Ben. My Ben. His voice was laced with an intimacy that was reserved for me. "Stay a little longer. We can finally plan that trip to Aspen, just the two of us." Aspen. He had promised to take Leo and me to Aspen after this deployment. I pressed my fist against my mouth to stifle a sob as Clara giggled again. "Okay, but only if you make me those pancakes I love." I slid down the wall, the rough texture of the coat scratching my cheek. I stayed there, in the dark, until I heard Clara's car pull away. I quietly let myself out, found Leo still huddled on the stairs, and took his hand. Without a word, I led him out of that house, out of the life I thought I had, and drove to a 24-hour diner. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, with Leo quietly eating a stack of chocolate chip pancakes, I called my father. I didn't want the senator. I needed my dad. I needed to hear his voice, strong and reassuring, telling me he would handle it, that he was on my side. His voice came through the line, clipped and impatient. Nora, what is it? I'm in the middle of a fundraiser. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry started to well up. Dad, it's Ben and Clara. He cut me off. His tone dropped, becoming as cold and hard as granite. Nora, I don't care how you feel. Do not make a scene. Ben Carter is a respected military history professor. Clara, she's just being flighty. You are an officer in the United States Army. Start acting like one. Handle this quietly. We'll arrange for a discreet divorce. I have lawyers for this. Just make sure this does not hit the papers. The line went dead. The dial tone that followed was a sound more final and more brutal than any explosion I had ever heard on the battlefield. It was the sound of being utterly and completely alone. My tears dried instantly, replaced by a chilling clarity. I paid the bill, drove a sleeping Leo back, and carried him inside, putting him to bed in his room. Then I walked into the living room, where Ben and Clara were now sitting on the couch, watching TV as if nothing had happened. They looked up, their faces a mixture of shock and guilt. Before I could speak, Ben stood up, his expression hardening into one of righteous indignation. Where have you been? You can't just disappear. See, this is the problem, Nora. You're always gone. You chose the army. You didn't choose this family. Clara just started to cry. Those practiced pretty tears she always used to get her way. I'm so sorry, Nora, she whimpered. I didn't mean for it to happen. As if betrayal was a clumsy accident, like spilling a glass of wine. I looked at them. The man I had married, the father of my child, the sister I had grown up with, the one I had protected. They were my entire world, and in that moment, I felt nothing but a profound, sickening disgust. I knew I had to leave. Not because I was weak or broken, but because I couldn't breathe the same air as them anymore. As I walked out of that house for the last time, one question echoed in the sudden, vast emptiness of my mind. How did it all come to this? It didn't start tonight. No. The crack that shattered my world had been forming for a very long time, etched into the cold marble hallways of our house in Georgetown. That house in Washington, D.C. was less of a home and more of a museum dedicated to the political legacy of the Huber family. Every surface gleamed with lemon polish, every portrait was perfectly hung, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and ambition. There was a suffocating perfection to it, a silence that was only ever broken by the measured tones of political discussion. Dinner was served precisely at 7 o'clock every evening. The conversations were never about school, or friends, or dreams. They were about Senate bills, voting blocks, and fundraising strategies. My father, Senator Richard Huber, presided over the table like a king holding court. It was at that dinner table that I learned my place. My younger sister, Clara, was the family's designated artist, the free spirit. She could doodle on the fine linen napkins with a fork, and my father would chuckle, calling it a burst of creativity. He saw her carelessness as a sign of an unburdened, artistic soul. But if I, in a moment of distraction, accidentally spilled a single drop of water, his gaze would sharpen, his voice would drop, and the verdict would be delivered with chilling finality. A Huber is never careless, Nora. The contrast taught me the first and most fundamental lesson of my childhood. My father's love was conditional, and I, for some reason, did not meet the conditions. Clara was loved for who she was. I was scrutinized for what I did. She was a work of art to be admired. I was a soldier in training, expected to be flawless. The lesson was driven home on my 10th birthday. I had saved my allowance for 2 months to buy him the perfect gift. I'd noticed he always signed legislation with a specific brand of fountain pen, a cross, with a heavy silver casing. I found one just like it, wrapped it myself in gold paper, and waited with a knot of hopeful anxiety in my stomach. When he opened it, his reaction was a polite, empty void. He glanced at the pen, set it aside on the table, and said, "Thank you, Nora." His eyes already scanning the room for his next conversation. He never looked at me. A few minutes later, Clara presented her gift. It was a crayon drawing, a child's clumsy sketch of the U.S. Capitol building with a lopsided dome. My father's face lit up. He beamed, enveloped her in a hug, and boomed for all the guests to hear. "Magnificent. Now this. This is a gift from the heart." Before the night was over, he had given the drawing to his aide with instructions to have it professionally framed and hung in his private study. My cross pen remained in his desk drawer, untouched, forever. It became a silent, silver monument to my inadequacy. The only person who truly saw me, the real me, was my grandfather. He was a retired Marine Corps colonel, a veteran of Vietnam, with kind laugh lines around his eyes and hands as rough and steady as old leather. During my father's endless political parties, Grandpa would find me and lead me out to the back porch, away from the smoke-filled rooms and false smiles. He didn't talk about bills or elections. He told me stories about the brotherhood he found in the humid jungles of a country half a world away, about honor that wasn't for show, but was something you carried inside you. On my 15th birthday, he pressed something small and cool into my hand. It was his old military-issue compass, its brass casing worn smooth with time. "Your father's world has many directions, Nora," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Ambition, power, reputation, they all pull you different ways. But there is only one true north. When you're lost, you trust this." He tapped the glass face of the compass, not the maps other people draw for you. In that moment, holding that compass, I felt a sense of worth that had nothing to do with perfect grades or flawless behavior. It was the first time I felt I was enough, just as I was. That compass gave me the courage for my first real act of rebellion, applying to West Point. It wasn't just about a career, it was an escape. It was a world built on merit, discipline, and a code of honor my grandfather would understand. When the thick acceptance letter arrived, my heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a gift for someone else. This was mine, a victory I'd earned in silence through endless hours of studying and training. With trembling hands, I brought the letter to my father in the living room. I held it out to him, a desperate, foolish part of me still hoping for a glimmer of pride in his eyes. He took it, read it with an unreadable expression, and then placed it down on the mahogany coffee table between us. He looked at me, not with pride, but with a cold assessment. "Fine," he said, his voice flat. "At least the military might teach you the discipline I couldn't. Go, and try not to tarnish the Huber name." No congratulations, no hug, not even a simple, "well done." Just a warning. In his eyes, my greatest achievement was simply another chance for me to fail him, to stain the perfect, polished reputation of his name. I stood there, the acceptance letter lying on the table like an indictment, and I understood. The crack in my world didn't start the night my husband betrayed me. It had been there all along. That compass became my most prized possession. It was a reminder that my worth wasn't determined by my father's approval. If you believe that a person's true worth comes from their character, not from the approval of others, please support this story with a like and comment with the word compass below. The first day at West Point, they shaved my head. As my long brown hair fell to the floor in clumps, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I wasn't the senator's daughter anymore. I was just another cadet, another shaved head in a sea of gray uniforms. I had thought that would be enough. I was wrong. West Point was nothing like I had imagined. It was a crucible designed to melt you down and forge you into something new. And it was far more unforgiving than my father's cold expectations. The physical toll was immense. 20-mile ruck marches with a 60-pound pack that dug into my shoulders until they were raw. Lungs burning for air on 5-mile runs before the sun was even up. The mental exhaustion was worse. Sleepless nights spent memorizing military history and tactical formations until the words blurred together on the page. And the constant, unrelenting chorus of drill instructors shouting, their voices stripping away every last shred of your civilian identity. The name Huber didn't protect me. It made me a target. Within the first week, I was christened with a nickname, the Senate Princess. It was spat at me in the mess hall and whispered behind my back in the barracks. One drill instructor in particular, a Captain Thorne with eyes like chips of flint, made it his personal mission to break me. "Think the Huber name is gonna get you a pass here, princess," he would roar, his face inches from mine, spittle flying. "Here, you're not a name, you're a number. You're 0, now give me 50. He pushed me harder than anyone else. More push-ups, longer watch duties, the worst cleaning assignments, like scrubbing the latrines with a toothbrush. Every day was a battle. A battle against the mud, the cold, the exhaustion, and the gnawing loneliness. There were nights I'd lie in my bunk, muscles screaming, every fiber of my being begging me to quit. I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if my father had been right, if I was just tarnishing the family name. It was in one of those darkest moments that I found an unexpected ally. Her name was Maria Garcia, a tough, quick-witted girl from a small town in Texas who had a drawl as wide as the state she came from. Maria didn't care that my father was a senator. She didn't see a princess. She just saw another plebe trying to survive, just like her. She saw me. One night, I was burning up with a fever, my head pounding. But an essay on the Napoleonic Wars was due at 600. I was shivering at my desk, trying to force my mind to focus. I must have looked as bad as I felt, because Maria walked over, touched my forehead, and just shook her head. She disappeared and came back a few minutes later with a steaming styrofoam cup of chicken noodle soup she'd somehow managed to get from the mess hall kitchen after hours. She placed it on my desk, pulled up a chair, and just sat with me in silence while I worked. "Out here," she said quietly, her Texas accent a warm blanket in the cold, sterile barracks, "we're all we've got." It was a simple act of kindness, but it felt monumental. It was a warmth, a sense of solidarity I had never once received from my own sister. Maria's quiet presence that night gave me the strength to finish the essay and push through the fever. My first Thanksgiving leave was a test of that newfound strength. Standing at a payphone on campus, I called home. I could hear the sounds of a party in the background, the clinking of glasses, bursts of laughter, the low hum of important conversations. My heart ached with a familiar loneliness. I told my father how hard it was, how demanding the training was, foolishly hoping for a word of encouragement, a simple, "I'm proud of you." His response was swift and surgical. "That was your choice, Nora. You deal with it, don't call here to complain." Then I heard him turn away from the phone, his voice already shifting to a warmer, more charming tone for one of his guests. He hung up. I stood there, holding the cold receiver, listening to the dial tone. The first snowflakes of winter had begun to fall, dusting the gray stone buildings of the campus. In that moment, the reality of my situation settled over me with the weight of a lead blanket. I was completely, unequivocally, on my own. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. I just clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white, hung up the phone, and walked back to the barracks. That night, something inside me shifted. The hurt didn't disappear, but it crystallized. It hardened into something else. Resolve. A cold, hard, diamond-like resolve. I would not just survive this place, I would excel. I would grind my loneliness and his rejection into fuel. I poured everything I had into my training. I spent extra hours at the shooting range until I could field strip and reassemble my rifle in the dark. My aim became legendary. I was the top marksman in my class. During field exercises, I volunteered for the toughest assignments, leading my squad through grueling land navigation courses in freezing rain. I stopped being the Senate princess. I became Huber, the one you wanted on your fire team. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the way people looked at me began to change. The whispers died down, replaced by nods of respect. Even Captain Thorne's relentless scrutiny seemed to lessen. Then, during a final performance review before the end of our first year, he called me into his office. I stood at attention, bracing for another verbal assault. He looked over my file, silent for a long moment. Then he looked up, his flinty eyes meeting mine directly. "Huber," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual roar. "You are not the best soldier in this class because you are a senator's daughter. You are the best soldier in this class in spite of being his daughter." It wasn't a compliment shouted on a parade ground. It was a quiet, grudging admission delivered in a sterile office. And it was the most valuable praise I'd ever received in my entire life. Victory at West Point earned me respect, but it couldn't warm my heart. That warmth came from the most unexpected of places, a military history lecture hall. His name was Ben Carter, and he was a civilian professor, a stark contrast to the uniformed instructors who barked orders and demanded perfection. He didn't look like a soldier. He had kind eyes, a thoughtful smile, and a passion for history that was infectious. While other instructors taught us about troop movements and casualty counts, Ben taught us about the people inside the uniforms. He focused on the impossible moral choices a commander faces in the fog of war, the human cost of every strategic decision. He made history breathe. To everyone else, I was Cadet Huber, a name that carried the weight of both my rank and my family. But Ben saw something different. After one particularly intense lecture on the ethics of command during the Battle of Gettysburg, he asked me to stay behind. I expected a critique of my tactical analysis. Instead, he leaned against his desk, his expression open and curious, and for the first time, he used my name. Not my last name, my first name. "So, Nora," he said, his voice gentle. "What do you think? Not as a cadet, but as a person?" The question stunned me into silence. It was so simple, yet no one had ever asked me that before. In my father's house, I was the senator's daughter, a role to be performed. At West Point, I was Cadet Huber, a soldier in the making. Ben was the first person who seemed interested in the woman who existed somewhere in between. He wanted to know what I thought, not what I was trained to think. That simple question was the beginning. We started taking long walks along the banks of the Hudson River, the crisp autumn air filled with the scent of fallen leaves. He didn't ask about politics or my father's career. He asked about my dreams, what books I loved, what music made me feel alive. He was building a bridge to the person I had kept hidden for so long. On one of those walks, a gust of wind blowing through the valley, he noticed the old brass compass I always carried, attached to my pack. Unlike others who might have dismissed it as an old trinket, Ben's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's a beautiful piece," he said. "Does it have a story?" Hesitantly, I told him about my grandfather. I told him about the cold marble house in Georgetown and the one man who had offered me unconditional warmth. I told him about True North. Ben listened, his gaze never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just listened. When I finished, a lump forming in my throat, he said something I will never forget. "Your grandfather gave you an invaluable gift," he said softly. "A moral compass. That's more important than any medal, Nora." He saw it. He understood. He looked past the soldier, past the Huber name, and saw the 15-year-old girl on the porch who just wanted to be seen. In that moment, I felt a lifetime of defenses begin to crumble. Bringing him home for Thanksgiving was, predictably, a disaster. The Georgetown house was in full political schmoozing mode. My father treated Ben with a polite, condescending air that was more insulting than outright hostility. "Teaching history, you say?" he commented, swirling the wine in his glass. "Must be a stable profession." He said the word stable as if it were a synonym for unambitious. Clara, meanwhile, flitted around Ben, laughing too loudly at his jokes, finding excuses to touch his arm. I felt that old, familiar rage simmering just beneath the surface, the feeling of being invisible in my own home. The drive back to West Point was quiet and tense. I was waiting for him to comment, to criticize, to say anything that would confirm my deepest fear, that my family was a burden no one would want to take on. Instead, he reached over and took my hand. His grip was warm and steady. "Now I understand," he said, his voice full of a quiet awe. "I understand why you're so strong." He didn't criticize my family. He acknowledged the strength I had forged in spite of them. He didn't see me as damaged goods. He saw me as a survivor. That night, I knew I was in love with him. We got married after graduation. It wasn't a lavish DC wedding designed for newspaper headlines. It was a small, intimate ceremony under the sprawling branches of an old oak tree in the backyard of our first rental house near Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We were surrounded by a handful of friends, people who knew us, not our names. When our son Leo was born a year later, I experienced a love so pure and unconditional, it took my breath away. Holding my tiny son in my arms, watching Ben look at us with tears of joy in his eyes, I finally felt a sense of peace I had never known. The hole in my heart, the one that had been carved out by years of striving for an approval I would never receive, was finally full. I had found my true north. It wasn't a direction on a map. It was a feeling. It was the weight of Leo's head on my shoulder, the sound of Ben's laughter in our small kitchen. I had built my own fortress of peace, brick by brick, a sanctuary where the long, cold shadow of the Huber name could never reach. Or so I thought. But any fortress can be breached, and my enemy didn't use force. They used a far more insidious weapon: family. My first deployment to Afghanistan after Leo was born was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The distance was a physical ache. The only lifeline I had to my peaceful world in Colorado was a series of glitchy, unreliable video calls. Through the grainy screen, I saw my son growing up in pixels. I also saw my husband changing. Ben looked tired, his smile strained. The dark circles under his eyes seemed to deepen with each call. At first, I was grateful for my sister's help. Clara had moved to Colorado Springs a few months before I deployed, claiming she wanted a change of scenery from the DC political machine. It seemed like perfect timing. She could support Ben while I was away. "Aunt Clara took me for ice cream today," Leo would shout into the microphone, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Aunt Clara bought me a new Lego set, the big one." Initially, I felt a wave of relief. Ben had help. Leo was happy. But as the weeks turned into months, a subtle disquiet began to creep in. The name Clara started appearing in Leo's stories more often than the word dad. She was the one taking him to the park, the one helping with his homework, the one tucking him in at night. I tried to brush it off as gratitude, but a small, cold knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach. It was a soldier's instinct, a quiet alarm bell warning me that the perimeter had been breached. The feeling intensified when I came home for a short 2-week leave. The moment I walked through the door, I knew something was off. The air smelled different. My favorite scented candles, a calming lavender and chamomile blend, had been replaced with a cloyingly sweet gardenia scent that I'd always hated. It was Clara's favorite. On the front porch, the welcome home soldier doormat I'd bought at a small shop near Fort Bragg was gone, replaced by a garish floral one. They were small things, almost too petty to mention. But they were my things, my choices, my home. When I asked Ben about it, he just shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Oh, Clara thought the other one was getting worn out. She thought this one was more cheerful. Don't be so sensitive, Nora. Don't be so sensitive." The words hit me like a physical slap. They were the exact same words my father had used my entire life to dismiss my feelings, to make me feel like my reactions were the problem, not the offense itself. To hear them from Ben, my Ben, the one person who was supposed to be my sanctuary from that world. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I started listening to talks by Brené Brown during my downtime in Afghanistan, trying to understand the dynamics of trust and vulnerability. She taught that trust is built in the small moments, the sliding door moments where someone chooses to turn towards you instead of away. Ben was turning away. But Brown also taught that vulnerability is the price of courage, so I told myself I needed to trust him. I pushed my doubts down, blaming them on the distance and the stress of deployment. My birthday came and went while I was overseas. A week later, a package arrived for me in the mail. It was from Clara. I opened it, a flicker of hope warring with my apprehension. Inside was a set of expensive silk pajamas. They were beautiful, but as I held them up, a cold feeling washed over me. They were a size small. I hadn't been a size small since before Leo was born. Tucked inside was a handwritten card, but it wasn't addressed to me. It read, "To Ben, help my sister feel like a woman again after all those dry months in the desert. Love, Clara. I dropped the silk pajamas as if they were on fire. The humiliation was so intense it made me feel sick to my stomach. This wasn't a gift. It was a power play. A cruel, deliberate message telling me that she was there, in my home, taking care of my husband, reminding him of the femininity I'd supposedly left behind in the dust of Afghanistan. It was a territorial marking, disguised as a birthday present. When I confronted Ben about it during our next call, my voice shaking with fury, he sighed with exasperation. "Oh, come on, Nora. You know how Clara is. She's just thoughtless. She didn't mean anything by it." He was defending her. He was making excuses for an act of calculated cruelty. His refusal to see it, to stand up for me, was a glaring red flag I could no longer ignore. The final straw came a month before I was scheduled to return home. I was doing our monthly budget online, paying bills from half a world away, when I saw it. A $5,000 transfer from our joint savings account. I didn't recognize the recipient. My blood ran cold. I called Ben immediately. He was defensive from the start. "What's the big deal?" he asked, his voice strained. "The big deal, Ben, is that $5,000 is missing from our savings. Who did you send it to?" There was a long pause, and then he admitted it. "I loaned it to Clara. She wants to invest in a new art gallery. It's a great opportunity for her." He had given my sister $5,000 of our money we were saving for a down payment on a permanent home, without consulting me. Without even mentioning it. "That's my money too, Ben," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "And that's my sister. Why would you do that without talking to me?" His reply sealed the crack in my trust, turning it into a chasm. "Why do you always have to make things so difficult, Nora? It's just money. She's your sister, for God's sake. You're being selfish and petty." He gaslighted me. He twisted it until I was the villain, the cold, unfeeling, selfish wife who didn't support her own family. I said nothing. I just ended the call. I sat in the dark of my barracks, the hum of the base generator a lonely sound in the Afghan night. The fortress I thought I had built, the one made of love and trust, was being dismantled from the inside out. And the man I had entrusted to guard its gates had just handed the enemy the key. I caught a flight 2 days early, Brené Brown's words about the courage to be vulnerable echoing in my head. I had decided to trust, to have faith in the man I married. But the truth waiting for me at home didn't require courage. It required a soldier. The plastic F-22 Raptor in my duffel bag felt impossibly heavy as I walked up to the front door. It was unlocked. Strange. My training screamed a single word: wrong. I pushed the door open. A dead, unnatural silence greeted me. Then the smell hit me. Clara's perfume. A cloying, overpowering tuberose scent I'd always hated. It was clinging to the air, an invisible invader in my home. My eyes scanned the living room, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs, not with joy, but with a primal red alert. On the coffee table sat the evidence: 2 half-empty glasses of red wine. One of them was smeared with Clara's signature shade of bright crimson lipstick. Wrong, wrong, wrong. The word pulsed in my head, a frantic drumbeat of dread. This wasn't a friendly visit. This was a desecration. That's when Leo appeared at the top of the stairs, his face a small white mask of terror. His whispered plea was an order I followed instinctively. He pulled me into the dark, cedar-scented closet, my own home becoming my prison. And from within that prison, I listened as my world was executed. I heard them coming upstairs, laughing. The sound was casual, intimate. It was the sound of 2 people completely at ease in a stolen moment. Then I heard their voices, words sharper than shrapnel. "She's probably still busy playing Rambo somewhere," Clara said, her voice dripping with a familiar, dismissive condescension. Ben laughed. A real, genuine laugh. The sound twisted my insides into a knot of pure agony. "Good," he said. "Gives us more time." More time. They wanted more time. More time in my bed, in my house, with my son just down the hall. They called me the Ice Queen, mocking the very seriousness and dedication that my country demanded of me, that he once claimed to love. He, who had once praised my strength, was now using it as a punchline with my own sister. Every word was a nail hammered into the coffin of the life I thought I had. I waited, my breath held tight in my chest, until I heard them leave. I led Leo out to the car, his small hand cold and clammy in mine. We drove in silence to a 24/7 Denny's, a lonely beacon of fluorescent light in the dark. The place was nearly empty. I ordered him pancakes he didn't want and watched him push the whipped cream around his plate. Under the buzzing neon lights, the truth finally came out, delivered in the small, halting whispers of a terrified 7-year-old. It had been going on for a long time, every time I deployed. Clara would stay over. They would close the bedroom door. Daddy said it was a grown-up game. Leo mumbled, tears tracking through the syrup on his cheeks. He said if I told you, you'd be very sad and you'd never come home again. His voice broke, a heartbreaking little sob escaping. I don't want you to go away forever, Mommy. My entire ribcage felt like it was cracking open. The pain was physical, immense, stealing the air from my lungs. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had taken my son's pure, unconditional love for me and twisted it into a weapon against me. They had made my own child a hostage, forcing him to carry the toxic secret of their affair to protect me from a pain they were actively inflicting. It was an act of monstrous, unforgivable cruelty. The final hammer blow came from my father. Standing by the payphone near the greasy diner kitchen, I made the call. I explained the situation, my voice flat and emotionless, the tears having already frozen inside me. His response was not one of fatherly protection. It was the cold, calculated damage control of a politician. He told me not to be a fool, to handle it quietly, to think of the family name. The re-election. When he hung up, I didn't feel pain anymore. I felt nothing. A vast, hollow emptiness. And then, from that void, something new began to rise. It was a terrifyingly clear, cold resolve. It was the soldier he had always wanted me to be, just not in the way he had intended. I walked back to the booth. Leo had fallen asleep, his head pillowed on his arms, a smear of chocolate on his cheek. Looking at his innocent, sleeping face, I knew with absolute certainty what I had to do. The war in Afghanistan was over for me, but the most important battle of my life, the fight for my son, for his future, for his very soul, had just begun. They thought they had left me with nothing. They were wrong. They had left me with a reason, and a reason is the most dangerous weapon of all. They used my son's love as a shield for their lies. If you believe that a child's heart should be a sanctuary, not a secret keeper, please hit the like button and show your support for Leo by commenting with the word "protect" below. The next morning, I didn't cry. I made a cup of black coffee, strong enough to strip paint. The hollow ache in my chest was still there, but it was now overlaid with a layer of ice. Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a text drilled into us at West Point, teaches that every battle is won or lost before it is ever fought. It is won in the preparation. A soldier never goes into battle without a plan. And this was the battle of my life. I sat down with a notepad at the small desk of the cheap motel room I checked into. I gave my new mission a code name, Operation Sunrise, the dawn of a new life for me and my son. Phase 1, Secure Legal Counsel. I ignored the list of high-priced, politically connected DC law firms my father would have chosen, the ones skilled in burying scandals. I did my own research. I found a small independent practice in Denver run by a woman named Jessica Riley. Her biography was short and to the point. Former JAG Corps attorney, 15 years specializing in military divorces, and a reputation for being a shark. She was exactly what I needed. I met with her that afternoon. She was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through the composed officer and into the wounded woman beneath. I told her everything, leaving out no detail. When I finished, she didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She just nodded, a grim smile touching her lips. "Captain," she said, her voice firm, "we are not just going to divorce them. We are going to dismantle them." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Phase 2, Intelligence gathering. Know your enemy and know yourself, Sun Tzu wrote, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles. I needed to know exactly what I was up against. I called Ben and told him I needed to come back to the house to pack some personal belongings for myself and Leo. My voice was quiet, subdued. I played the part of the broken wife perfectly. He and Clara were practically dripping with condescending pity when I arrived. "Take all the time you need, Nora," Ben said, placing a comforting hand on my arm that made my skin crawl. Clara offered me a glass of water, her eyes full of fake concern. While they busied themselves in the kitchen, giving me space, I went to the home office. It took me less than 10 minutes. I inserted a flash drive into the back of our shared desktop computer and initiated a full data transfer of the hard drive. My military training had taught me efficiency under pressure. I took my son's favorite books, a few changes of clothes, and left, the flash drive feeling like a live grenade in my pocket. That night, back in the sterile anonymity of my motel room, I plugged the drive into my laptop and began to sift through the wreckage of my marriage. It was worse than I could have imagined. There were hundreds of emails between Ben and Clara, a digital chronicle of their affair. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had conspired against me. Ben complained about the burden of being married to a woman who was as dry as a military textbook. He called me unfeeling, cold, masculine. But it was Clara's emails that truly chilled me to the bone. She was systematically planning my erasure. She had a whole strategy laid out for Ben to gain primary custody of Leo. Her argument was insidious. She would suggest that my deployments had given me PTSD, that I was an unstable and emotionally distant mother, unfit to raise a child. They were going to use my service, my sacrifice, as a weapon to take my son from me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated, premeditated character assassination. Phase 3. Build alliances. I knew I couldn't fight this war alone. My first call was to my best friend from West Point, Maria. She was now a major working at the Pentagon. I didn't have to give her the sordid details. I just told her I was in trouble and needed help. Maria's response was immediate. "What do you need? Just say the word." She became my intelligence officer in the Capitol. Within a day, she had gathered every performance review, every letter of commendation, every glowing report from my commanding officers throughout my career. It was a mountain of evidence proving that I was not unstable, but a highly decorated, exemplary officer. These were the first bullets in my arsenal. Phase 4. Protect the asset. The most important part of this operation was Leo. He was the reason I was fighting. I took him to see a child psychologist, a kind woman with a gentle voice and a warm office filled with toys. I needed a professional assessment of the damage Ben and Clara had done, a formal record of the emotional burden they had placed on him. During one of their sessions, the therapist gave Leo some paper and crayons and asked him to draw his family. I will never forget the picture he drew. He drew a big house. On one side of the house, far away, was a stick figure of a woman in a uniform. That was me. In the center of the house were two figures holding hands, a man and another woman. That was his father and his aunt. And then, in the very corner of the page, small and alone, was a little boy. That was him. The therapist handed me the drawing with a sad, knowing look. That piece of paper was more powerful than any email, more damning than any legal document. It was the unvarnished testimony of a child whose world had been broken. It wasn't just a weapon for my legal battle. It was a stark, heartbreaking reminder of exactly what I was fighting for. I carefully placed the drawing in a file with the rest of my evidence. The plan was in place. The assets were secured. The battlefield was set. Sun Tzu wrote, "The opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself." That day, in the sterile conference room of my lawyer's Denver office, I held that opportunity in my hand. They had provided me with everything I needed. Their arrogance was my greatest tactical advantage. The mandatory mediation session was staged like a corporate negotiation. Ben, Clara, and their slick, overconfident lawyer sat on one side of the polished mahogany table, looking relaxed. They thought this was a formality, a simple matter of dictating terms to a broken woman. On a large screen mounted on the wall, My father's face presided over the scene via video call from DC, his expression as cold and impassive as a marble statue. He was here to ensure a quiet, clean resolution that would protect his reputation. They all believed they were in control. Ben's lawyer began, his voice oozing a patronizing sympathy. He spoke of Ben's deep regret and Clara's youthful indiscretion. He then slid a document across the table. It was, he explained, a generous divorce settlement. It offered a respectable financial package in exchange for two simple conditions: my absolute silence about the affair and a joint custody agreement for Leo. This is the best way forward for everyone, my father's voice boomed from the screen, a senatorial decree. Especially for Leo. They all looked at me, expecting tears, a quiet capitulation. I said nothing. I simply met the eyes of my lawyer, Jessica, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The show was about to begin. Jessica smiled, a thin, dangerous smile that didn't reach her eyes. She pushed their proposal back across the table. Then, she placed a thick, 1-inch binder in its place with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. Before we discuss your generous offer, she said, her voice cutting through the smug atmosphere, I'd like to read a few things for the record. Let's start with an email, shall we? Dated March 15th, from Mr. Carter to Ms. Huber. She flipped open the binder and began to read. I can't take it anymore, Clara. Living with her is like living with a robot. All duty, no heart. I need to feel alive again. Ben's face went from confident to ghost white in a single heartbeat. Clara began to tremble, her manicured hands gripping each other in her lap. My father's image on the screen remained still, but a flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed his features. Jessica continued, her voice relentless, reading excerpt after excerpt. Ben's complaints about my masculine coldness. Clara's suggestions for their romantic getaways. Their shared jokes about my career. Each word was a precisely aimed shot, dismantling their carefully constructed facade of regret. Ben's lawyer finally found his voice, sputtering. This is an invasion of privacy. These are just words, exchanged in a moment of weakness. A moment of weakness? Jessica interrupted smoothly, placing a second, slimmer file on top of the first. Perhaps you'll find this more compelling. She opened it. This is a report from the child psychologist for Leo Huber. I'll quote directly. The child exhibits significant signs of anxiety and emotional distress, stemming from being coerced into keeping a secret that compromises his loyalty to his mother. Jessica paused, letting the clinical, damning words hang in the air. Then she held up a laminated copy of Leo's crayon drawing. The stick figure of me, far away. The little boy, alone in the corner. The silence in the room was absolute, thick and suffocating. Clara finally broke it with a choked, hysterical sob. Ben stared at the drawing, his mouth hanging open, all the color drained from his face. He looked utterly defeated. This was my cue. I had been silent the entire time, a spectator at my own execution turned resurrection. Now, I spoke for the first time. My voice was calm, level, and as cold as the ice in my heart. And finally, I said, my eyes fixed directly on the camera, on the face of the man on the screen. For the senator. Jessica slid a small digital audio recorder and a single sheet of paper across the table to Ben's lawyer. That is a copy of the phone call between my client and Senator Huber on the night she discovered the affair, she stated. And this, she tapped the paper, is our counteroffer. I leaned forward, my voice never rising, every word a deliberate final blow. You have 10 minutes to sign that agreement. It grants me sole and full custody of my son. It waives any and all alimony or child support from me to Ben. And it includes a restraining order, legally barring Clara Huber from coming within 500 yards of my son. If that document is not signed and dated in the next 10 minutes, I paused, letting the weight of my ultimatum sink in. Then the recording you're holding, along with the complete email chains and the psychologist's report, will be accidentally leaked to every major news outlet in Washington. Your choice. The game was over. My father stared at me from the screen. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The look in his eyes was one I had never seen before. It wasn't the look of a disappointed father or an angry patriarch. It was the look of a political rival who had just been checkmated, outmaneuvered by an opponent he had fatally underestimated. He gave a single, sharp nod to Ben's lawyer. Checkmate. When the conference room door closed, the adrenaline vanished, and for the first time in days, I felt the full weight of everything. I didn't feel like a victor. I just felt exhausted. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that follows a long and brutal campaign. The war was over, but now I had to navigate the ruins. Leo and I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Colorado Springs. The first few days passed in a strange, unfamiliar quiet. There were no tense phone calls, no toxic emails waiting in my inbox, no feeling of walking on eggshells. There was just the gentle rhythm of a new life. Just the two of us. The silence I'd once feared in my empty house was now a source of peace. We spent our time doing the most wonderfully ordinary things. We sat on the floor together, meticulously assembling the Lego sets Leo had received, but never had the heart to build. We read stacks of books from the local library, his small voice sounding out the words as he sat tucked beside me on the couch. We baked chocolate chip cookies, filling our small apartment with the warm, sweet smell of something new and good. In the quiet simplicity of those moments, I started to feel myself breathe again. I was learning that setting a boundary isn't just about keeping the bad out, it's about creating a safe space to let the good in. About a week after the mediation, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was Ben's. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the trash can. A part of me wanted to just throw it away, unopened. But another part, the part that needed closure, needed to see it through to the very end. I tore it open. The letter was not an apology. It was a final, desperate act of manipulation. He wrote that I had used our son as a weapon. He called me a cold, calculating machine, a woman incapable of forgiveness or grace. He ended with a pathetic, venomous prophecy that I would live a lonely, bitter life, having destroyed everything good we ever had. I finished reading and folded the letter neatly. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pain. I felt a profound sense of pity. After everything, he still didn't get it. He couldn't see his own role in the destruction. I took the letter and a metal mixing bowl out to the small concrete patio behind our apartment. With a lighter, I set one corner of the paper on fire. I watched as the flames consumed his words, turning his accusations and deflections into gray, weightless ash. As the last embers died out, a final heavy chain I didn't even know I was still carrying seemed to fall away. That week, I started reading the Stoic philosophers Marcus Aurelius, Seneca. Their words resonated with the soldier in me. The idea of focusing only on what you can control, your own actions, your own integrity, your own responses, and letting go of what you cannot, the opinions and actions of others. Ben's letter was something I couldn't control. Burning it was something I could. The phone call from my mother came a few days later. It was the first time we'd spoken in months. Her voice was thin and trembling, laced with tears. She told me my father was furious, that he wasn't speaking to her, that Clara was a wreck, having a complete nervous breakdown. Then came the plea I'd been expecting. "Nora, can't you just be the bigger person?" she whispered. "Can't you find it in your heart to forgive? We're family, after all." Family. The word hung in the air between us. I took a deep, steadying breath. The old Nora would have caved, desperate for any scrap of maternal approval. But the old Nora was gone. "Mom, I love you," I said, and my voice was surprisingly calm and clear. "But I can't. I have to protect Leo, and I have to protect myself. The price of being in this family is silence and self-betrayal. And I'm not willing to pay it anymore." I paused, letting her absorb the words. "When you're ready to have a relationship that's just you and me, without Dad or Clara as intermediaries, please call me. My door is always open for that." I ended the call gently. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and the most necessary. It was the first and most important boundary I'd ever truly set for myself. The final step was to realign my own mission. My life as a frontline combat officer was over. My priorities had changed. My most important battle was now here, at home. I walked into the administrative office on base and formally submitted a request for a transfer to a non-deployable teaching position at the academy. My commanding officer, a full-bird colonel I respected immensely, called me into his office the next day. He had my file open on his desk. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled not with pity, but with a deep, knowing respect. "Captain," he said, his voice quiet, "I've read your file. You're one of the finest combat officers I've ever had the honor of serving with. But I also know that some of the toughest battles are never fought on a battlefield." He closed the file. "This choice you're making isn't a step down. It's not a retreat. It requires a different kind of courage." He stood and extended his hand. "Good luck, Nora." I shook his hand, my throat tight. For the first time, I felt like my sacrifice, the one I was making for my son, for my own peace of mind, was truly seen and honored. It was a validation that came not from my blood, but from my brotherhood in arms. And it meant more than my father's approval ever could have. Boundaries aren't walls to lock yourself in. They are doors. They allow you to choose who and what you let into your life. And I was finally starting to open new doors. My new role as an instructor at the academy was one of them. I loved it. I discovered a passion for teaching that I never knew I had. Standing in front of a lecture hall filled with young, eager cadets, I realized I had a new kind of mission. I didn't just teach them tactics from a textbook, I taught them about life from my scars. I spoke about the weight of command, the loneliness of leadership, and the moral courage it takes to do the right thing when no one is watching. I told them about fear, about mistakes, and about the profound importance of compassion on the battlefield. They didn't call me the Senate Princess or the Ice Queen. They called me ma'am. And they said it with a respect that was earned, not inherited. I found a new purpose in my service, not to a nation on a distant shore, but to the next generation of soldiers who would stand in my place. One afternoon, I found a letter left on my desk from a young cadet who had been struggling. "Ma'am," it read, "thank you for teaching me that real strength isn't about never falling down. It's about knowing what you're willing to stand back up for." I folded the letter and kept it. My legacy, I realized, was being written in a new and far more meaningful way. On Sundays, Leo and I started attending a small community church near our apartment. I wasn't particularly religious, but I found a quiet comfort in the old wooden pews and the sense of shared peace. One week, the pastor quoted from the Psalms, "Be still and know that I am God." The words settled deep inside me. After a lifetime of fighting, for approval, for respect, for survival, I was finally learning to be still, to accept the things I couldn't change, and to find faith in my own journey. The true healing, the moment when all the broken pieces of my past finally clicked into place, happened on a sunny autumn afternoon at Leo's elementary school. It was career day, and parents were invited to speak about their jobs. When it was Leo's turn to introduce me, he stood up straight and tall in front of his second-grade class, his small chest puffed out with pride. His teacher asked, "Leo, can you tell us what your mom does?" Leo looked at me, his eyes shining, and he said the words that healed every wound I had ever carried. "My mom is a soldier," he said, his voice clear and proud. "She used to fight in faraway places, but now she's home, fighting for me." Time seemed to stop. The world narrowed to the sight of my son's proud, smiling face. He didn't see a broken woman or a failed wife. He saw his protector, his hero. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in a very long time, they weren't tears of pain or anger. They were tears of gratitude. Every sacrifice, every battle, every moment of agony had been worth it to arrive at this single, perfect moment. This was my Medal of Honor, the highest award I would ever receive. On Leo's 8th birthday, I gave him the only heirloom that truly mattered. I took out my grandfather's old brass compass and placed it in his small hands. "This belonged to your great-grandfather," I told him, closing his fingers around it. "There will be times in your life, buddy, when you feel lost. People will tell you to go this way or that way. They'll show you their maps. I looked him right in the eye. But you have to remember, there's only one true north. It's in here. I tapped his chest, right over his heart. Trust this. Trust your heart. It will never lead you wrong. He held the compass as if it were the most precious treasure in the world, his eyes wide with understanding. And I knew. I knew that the true legacy of my family, the legacy of courage, integrity, and honor passed down from my grandfather, would not die with me. It would live on. The story ends on a cold, clear morning before dawn. Leo and I made the journey together, hiking up to the summit of Pikes Peak to watch the sunrise. We sat huddled together in a thick blanket, sipping hot chocolate from a thermos, as the sky began to lighten. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the majestic Rocky Mountains, spilling across the horizon in breathtaking shades of orange and pink, I looked over at my son. He was smiling, a peaceful, radiant smile of pure contentment. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't worried about the future. I was just there. Present. I took a deep breath of the crisp, clean mountain air. I was here at the top of the world with the most important person in my universe. I had landed. I was safe, and I was finally, irrevocably, free. That sunrise on Pikes Peak wasn't just an end to my story. It was the beginning of my life, written on my own terms. My battle was fought in courtrooms and living rooms, but I know so many of you have fought your own silent wars, struggling to be seen and valued. My hope is that my journey reminds you of one simple truth. Your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. It is forged in the fire of your own resilience. If this story resonated with you, please like this video. In the comments below, I'd be honored if you would simply write, "My worth is my own." Subscribe to join our community, a place where we know that the deepest scars can lead to the greatest strength. Thank you for listening.